Okay, it is time for story time again, folks. Welcome back as we are reading Look Out for the Little Guy. Silly green screen. Silly green screen. Look out for the... Here, let's put it by the fire so that you can read it. Silly green screen. Hello, Matthew Coburn. Well, we are on chapter 3. And this chapter is entitled My Daddy, My Hero by Cassie Lang, plus a few notes from Daddy. When Cassie was 9 years old, her third grade teacher assigned the class to write an essay on my hero. Why am I including this in my book? Because I really wanted to include my little girl's perspective on some of the wild things happening to me that had a huge impact on her. Because I wanted her voice to be a part of all this too. And finally, because it's actually a pretty riveting account of one of my first outings as Ant-Man. I mean, she does skip over a little backstory, like me stealing Hank Pym's superhero suit and finding out Hank engineered all that to convince me to be Ant-Man and defeat Yellow Jacket and his evil plans. But for a 9-year-old who wasn't there for all that other stuff, she does pretty great. Without further ado, here is my daughter's earliest magnum opus. Mommy says Daddy is only supposed to visit me on certain days or weekends. Reminder to Daddy, hire a better attorney. There's footnotes. See, little footnotes down at the bottom after each one. But I want to tell you about the time that Daddy made a surprise visit and saved my life. It was a school night. I was in bed. Then there was a big crash. I heard Mommy scream, and suddenly there was a giant bee guy in my bedroom. But not a cool-looking one like Ant-Man. My daughter is literally the only person on the planet who thinks this, but I'll take it. He was an ugly-looking guy with extra legs and yellow stripes everywhere. He looked like if a giant robot bee got splashed in mustard. I wanted to scream, but before I could even take a breath, Bee Guy, later Daddy told me his name was really Yellow Jacket, grabbed me. I was totally scared about being grabbed by a strange grown-up, except then I stopped being scared when I saw how silly his costume was. Let's just say the standards for Halloween in San Francisco are high. That was a footnote. I've seen good costumes in the comic books Daddy sent me. This was not a good costume. He said, "Don't be scared." I asked him, "Are you a monster?" One of the many things I love about this girl is how she gets right to the point. He didn't really answer. All he said was, "Do I look like a monster?" Which is totally wrong because Mommy always says, don't judge a book by its cover. So I was about to say, I only care if you're a monster on the inside. But all I said was, I want my daddy. And then Daddy showed up. Well, Daddy and Bee Guy started fighting all around my bedroom. I wasn't even thinking about any of my toys getting broken because I was more worried about Daddy getting broken. Aw, also, she was not the only one with this fear. And then they got super small, and suddenly the fight was happening on my toy train set. And then a whole army of ants showed up and started fighting alongside Daddy to stop Bee Guy. And then things went from small to big. I mean, my whole train set. Suddenly there was a giant train in the middle of my bedroom and a giant ant. That's when Mommy's boyfriend, Paxton, showed up with the police. I thought he was going to help, but Bee Guy's outfit was too powerful, and soon he had Paxton and me trapped. The author of this essay pictured at her most angelic. And then the weirdest thing happened. Daddy just disappeared. Then Bee Guy started dancing around and yelling like something hurt, and he was hitting himself, and then he also disappeared. And then Daddy reappeared. I have no idea what happened at the end there, but Bee Guy was gone, regular size Daddy was back, and I was never going to stop hugging him ever again. Hi, Daddy here again. I have to confess something. All those reasons I listed at the beginning about why I decided to include this essay in my book, none of those were the real one. The truth is, I just love reading this little glimpse into my formerly little one's mind at this stage of her life. And not just because I missed out on so much of her childhood, Because as she's gotten older, as often as happens with dads and daughters, especially dads who've periodically gotten yanked out of those daughters' lives for long stretches and highly unpredictable reasons, things between us have gotten complicated. But it gives me life to remember a time that she did. And it also gives me hope that someday soon she will again. Now time for another FAMQ, frequently asked Ant-Man questions. Question. You can talk to ants, but can they talk back to you? Answer. Well, I don't literally speak to them. My headset converts speech into electromagnetic waves that targets the ants' olfactory centers, which is their main avenue of communication. A more accurate term would be that I can electroscent messages to ants. And yes, I know that does sound something like from a 1950s sci-fi movie. So to answer your question, kind of. Ants obviously don't have the same technology to speak back to me, at least not to my nose, but that doesn't mean they don't communicate. When I send my little buds a smellogram, if they receive it and it works for them, they get right to it. Ants actually get a ton of stuff done without saying a word. We could all learn a lesson from that. Chapter 4, Ant Inc. Ant Incorporated, to be exact. From the very first moment I met Hank Pym, I could tell he was going to be an effective boss. Think about it. Without lifting a finger, the man got me released from jail, ensnared in his house, and dutifully carrying out probably the riskiest and most complicated heist ever, at least until the nabbing of the Infinity Stones. What I didn't realize is that along the way, he would teach me how to be a good leader, too. It was quite simply a prerequisite for the mission Hank had recruited me for. Some scary military folks had taken over Hank's former company, and they were threatening to use his designs to make even scarier military tech with it. We were going to stop that by stealing it back. There's no way we'd be able to break into such an uber-secure place without the help of Hank's elite ant squad. That meant that, first and foremost, I'd have to learn how to work effectively with them, and eventually to lead them into battle. So Hank started me on regular training sessions with my tiny future colleagues. For the record, this was already on top of daily, physically exhausting combat training sessions with Hope. But that I didn't mind as much because, getting to be with Hope. Hank explained that even though his fancy high-tech invention, the EMP device, enabled humans to speak to ants, using electromagnetic waves to stimulate the olfactory centers in their brains that they use to communicate, it wasn't that simple. To truly take charge, he said, you have to prove to the ants that you can navigate the world as they do, alongside them at their scale, acting for all intents and purposes as if you belonged in the colony. That was the final, somewhat abstract sounding to me goal, and getting that goal was a huge challenge. At first, I was a very, very bad fit. I shrunk down to their size and dropped into an underground burrow in Hank's backyard where I was to meet the so-called crazy ant. One of those apricot-colored fellows came right up to me like a friendly dog, jumping into my lap while I petted it. I thought, instant report, Scott, you're a natural ant pal. Then suddenly its mates were all over me. I don't know if they were defending their colleague or joining the cuddle party, but it freaked me out. I instantly jumped back to human size to escape. Next up was an attempted meet and greet with a bullet ant, whose bite is exceptionally painful even to a full-sized human. Now I started imagining how that would feel in my head, which was currently slightly smaller than this guy's, and it was moving towards me fast. Now it was almost on top of me, now too on top for me to handle. I re-enlarged myself once again. I wasn't exactly nailing the show that you belong side of things. Finally, I started to make an ant-sized step of progress with the carpenter ants. I'd have had a relatively collegial history with them ever since my special CA pal, Anthony, helped me escape police custody. And they were the first types I managed to get through to, eventually. You see, even with the EMP's translations of my thoughts into ant speak, technically ant smell, there was still the challenge of, my thoughts. To really get through to ants, Hope and Hank had taught me that you have to maintain this extreme, almost meditative level of focus on precisely what you want to say to them. Easier said than thought. I couldn't even ask them to move a sugar cube into my cup of tea. Apparently my brain was jumping around all over the place, and that's why, rather than simply sweeten my beverage, they followed my brain's lead and marched all over the place too. Was I ever going to connect with this different species? Was I going to fail at this? Was I truly useless and unemployable by anyone? and therefore incapable of ever getting to see Cassie again? Fortunately, Hope got to the heart of my problem. She helped me figure out that I couldn't focus because ultimately I kept thinking about Cassie. So, like the martial arts master she is, Hope showed me how to turn that from a weakness into a strength. To use that burning concern as a laser beam to focus my intentions and block out everything else. Long story short, soon the Carpenters and I were on the same page, working together on an actual real-world training mission. We were supposed to retrieve the prototype of a signal decoy from one of Howard Stark's old storage facilities, which, unknown to Hank, was now the site of the Avengers compound. A fact that revealed itself to me rather clearly when Falcon almost pounded me into proto-hero pulp. Hank made an ant cam supposedly for mission review and optimization, but I think he just wanted to teach his ants photography. Turns out one of those little guys is pretty good. We call him Ansel Adams. Ha ha ha. The picture was taken by an ant. Despite this, the CAs and I were of one mind. Carpenter ants and I were of one mind enough for Anthony and Co. to fly me out of there with the prototype successfully in hand. But there's a big difference between hitching rides from one kind of ant and performing multiple other tasks with multiple other types of ants. To carry off the big job, I'd have to learn to lead a variety of ants as a team. That was what Hank and Hope had in mind when they brought me to the Hill. The Hill was a big ant hill and a part of Hank's backyard. I'd not seen before, sort of a community center for all kinds of ants. I was to walk in there and become one of them, one with all of them. Or at least not get thrown out, devoured, or panic enlarge my way out. Again. I gamely climbed up to the top of the hill, stuck my head into the entrance, and asked, "Who's ready for an ant party?" If this weren't a group of ants, I'd describe the response as crickets. So I decided to change tack and let my hands do the talking. Helping them out in their daily tasks, I started digging a tunnel. Brilliant, I thought. Now they'll be able to easily transport themselves from, and then my sad human attempt at a tunnel collapsed on me. No worries, I switched strategies again. I looked around to see what the ants were actually doing so I could join in that. I spotted a group of them moving eggs and larvae from one side of the mound to the other. Apparently, they were moving their little ones to the warmer part of the mound, the area more exposed to the heat from the sun. So that's how I'd help. I'd demonstrate my loyalty to the colony by helping care for their little precious. Oh man, they did not take well to what must have looked like a strange spaceman thing touching their babies. Within seconds, I was swarmed. Kudos to Scott, though. This swarming I kept my size. And even better, kept my cool. I quickly barked orders, "Get away, back off," which being focused and clear instructions, the ants obeyed, exactly like Hope had said. But again, getting ants to leave you alone wasn't exactly the level of teamwork I was striving for. So I pulled another trick out of my minuscule sleeve. I had brought some grains of sugar to use what entomologists technically refer to as a bribe. I produced a few grains and it worked. But post-sugar consumption, they immediately blew me off again. I climbed out of the mound, dejected and feeling like a failure. Definitely letting that mind of mine wander again back to all the usual places. Hank is going to send me back to jail. Hope will never love me. I'll never get to see Cassie again. When I walked back into the lab full size again, Hank has always had the perfect words for my current state of mind. "What the hell are you doing here?" Fortunately, Hope was a little more sympathetic. Even though she still had her doubts about me, she also reminded her dad of how his early experiments with EMP were huge fails, how he almost got killed by an army of bullet ants, and only the threat of a common enemy, a very nasty centipede, won them over to his side. She counseled me on how to present myself as more than just not a threat, as someone who they willingly followed because I got them. Ants, just like people, respond better to direction from someone capable of seeing their perspective. I hit the shrink button again and climbed back into the hill, pondering Hope's challenge. I had to find a way to rally the ants together as one team aligned with me. But all of this felt like a huge asymmetry of power. Me, the creature with the superior brain, using that brain to completely dominate a group of tiny beings and divert them from the essential tasks that they had to undertake round the clock to preserve their colony. In the back of my head, I felt that I could almost hear a voice, this time from the ants to me, saying, "Yes, you can get us to do things for you, but what have you ever done for us?" It was a darn good question. Sure, I'd barreled in there the first time and tried my idea of what would be useful to ants. You saw how that turned out. So I took a tally. I knew what didn't work with them. I knew how to get them to follow orders, but there was still some key piece of connection missing. If I was to convince the little guys to carry out this high wire mission, what was it? Then it hit me. I don't mean a great idea. No, what hit me was a wet, sticky drop from above. Then another. The ants noticed it too, or to be more precise, they smelled it. They definitely did not like what they were smelling. They started backing away, even though the drops were dripping right onto their precious piles of sugar. What was dripping into the anthill that was bothering the ants enough to make them avoid sugar? I retracted my mask and got a whiff of what they were smelling. Lemon juice. It was dripping right onto the sugar pile, dissolving it into a disgusting liquidy mess, a substance I had long despised in its typically above-ground form. Lemonade. But to ants, lemon juice is toxic. I poked my head up through the mountain to find a rotten lemon had somehow fallen on the top of the anthill, most likely nudged by a squirrel seeking better foraging. It was mottled, brown, and mushy, and in addition to crushing the anthill, it was dripping poison onto the ants' home. And even worse, it was way too big for even all those mighty carpenter ants to transport. Insensitive to pain, so not an easy target for the bullet ants, and no amount of insanity or electricity from the crazy ants would do the trick. But I realized that now, for the first time, all of us, different ants and ant-sized human, had something precious, a common enemy. Just like Hank and the bullet ants versus the centipede, a common cause where I could show that I was on their level. I snapped into focus, issuing clear, simple directives. Up, out of the hole, push the big yellow thing, roll it, roll it. Now, I don't claim to be able to read an ant's facial expressions, but I swear I could see something shift in how they were looking at me. The ants noticed my focus on and command of the situation, and it registered. They saw how seriously I was taking this threat, as if it was equally a threat to me. That was the kind of reciprocity we'd need for them to take on the dangerous mission that loomed for me, and a few more of my fellow humans. I know that because now, unlike in my first forays, they were looking at me, awaiting further instruction. They trusted me to lead them out of this. The only problem was, despite our stellar teamwork, that lemon corpse just didn't want to roll. Did I mention the mushy part? Even if eventually it became clear that this wasn't going to work. And no matter how many ants and I got behind it, the anthill was swiftly becoming unusable and potentially lethal. The lemon sugar mess was puddling dangerously close to the larvae. Finally, in desperation, I threw my armor-protected body between the yellow poison and their babies. And then the strangest thing happened. The ants swarmed me once again, but this time not to attack me, to lift me up back to my feet. And then they formed a kind of makeshift pyramid, as I soon realized, the pointy tip of an arrow pointing up. Now it was the ant speaking my language, being focused and direct with me. You, up, tall. And so finally, it felt like the right time to exercise my human dominance the right way, on behalf of my team. Before you could say thorax, I had boosted myself back up to human size, putting that horrible yellow stink bomb out of Hank's yard and into, well, it doesn't matter where. Then I shrank down once more to help the ants bury that noxious fluids they left behind and rebuild their home. Help that, this time around, they trusted me to render. I learned more about leadership that day in an anthill than any MBA program could teach. Observe your team, learn the correct leadership style for them, be clear and direct, and show that you understand where they're coming from. It felt good. Do you know what felt really good? Knowing I could finally walk back into the lab, helmeted head held high, and tell a very surprised Hope and Hank that wait a minute, what was that, my imagination, or did I see someone rushing into the house as if to avoid me seeing him? Away from the lemon tree now that I looked at, it seemed suspiciously far away from the anthill, and was that lemon juice I smelled on Hank's hands later? He wouldn't. Or maybe that was a demonstration of how confident he was in me, or at least his ants. In any case, I counted myself satisfied with the day's work and shrank down to check in one last time with my tiny office. And then, you know what words I finally managed to communicate to my team? Ant party! And now time for another frequently asked Ant-Man question. Question: how do you feel about being a human guinea pig for Hank Pym's experiments? Answer: I actually just feel just fine about it. First of all, Hank and Janet used them themselves as experimental fodder way before Hank started searching for nerdy thieves fresh out of prison. Also, although he can come back off as a bit of a crank, I know Hank's main driving impulse is to help humanity. Just think of how rich he could have gotten from his tech by selling it to the highest bidder. But instead, he stuck it to his principles and kept working on it until he had something that would benefit everyone. All of which means I know that he's not capable of designing something without also doing everything in his power to eliminate any harm to humans. I'm going to take a water break real quick, and then we shall move on to the next chapter. Chapter 5. Superheroing versus parenting. The ultimate showdown. I've done and will do a lot of unexpected things in my life, but one thing's for certain. You're never going to catch a picture of me flashing a thumbs up in my Ant-Man suit saying one of those meme-ready blurbs like, "Parents are the real superheroes." Because honestly, it's ridiculous to even compare the two occupations. It's not even apples and oranges. It's more like bowling balls versus porcupines. But I will admit, when you're ground down to exhaustion by either activity, superheroing or parenting, covered in any number of substances, sticky or stinky, it is possible to mix them up. So here's a handy guide to help you figure out which incredibly noble and frequently thankless jobs you're currently undertaking. And we have a nice chart here I'm going to read. So, origin story. A strange encounter with an alien life form or secret organization. Superhero. A very Mai Tai forward honeymoon. Parent. Power up. Superhero. An experimental military serum. Parent. An experimental early morning blend of coffee and more coffee. Uniform. Superhero. A high-tech flying mech suit. Parent. Whichever hoodie smells least ripe. Secret identity. Superhero. Operative for a mysteriously acronymed government agency. Parent. Often forgets actual name due to parent brain. Summons allies by superhero. Yelling, "Assemble!" Parent. Texting co-parent the emoji for poop, vomit, house on fire, or all of the above. Greatest nemesis. Superhero. A monster created from a cocktail of super soldier serum and your own blood. Parent. The undefeatable biological need to sleep. Best conflict ending strategy. Superhero. Turning villains' weapons against them. Parents. Who wants ice cream? Farthest journey. Superhero. The edge of the galaxy. Parent. The only store that actually had a llama piñata. Inspiring mantra. Superhero. Whatever it takes. Parent. They're vitally asleep. Must avoid detection by superhero. The media. Parent. Judgy mother-in-law. Most reliable defense. Superhero. Vibranium armor. Parent. Reading horror stories from parenting blogs. Hail Mary move. Superhero. Unveiling supernatural artifact. Parenting. Threatening to take away electronics. Secret vulnerability. Superhero. Weak spot and armor joints. Parent. Photo of the kids when they were little and asleep. In conclusion, so which job ultimately takes the cape as hardest? In my experience, hands down, it's parenting. Let me just put it this way. I have yet to have a bad guy throw up on me. On the beginning of a flight, a red eye, where we were sharing a single seat. Go through that once and you'll find yourself dreaming up gauntlets to take you to alternate timelines too. Chapter 6. No fam cue at the end of this chapter. That was a fun one. Might make that a short. Ant-Man and the Wasp. Second date or second chance? Some couples have a meet cute, some meet online. Many more meet at a bar than is really advisable. Hope and I had a meet weird. And I don't mean just how the first time we laid eyes on each other. I was waking up in her father's bed surrounded by a brigade of century ants prepared to devour me like a giant breadcrumb. Or that we got to know each other's vulnerabilities through weeks of brutal martial arts training. Or that the first time we shared a tear, it wasn't after an argument or a sappy movie, it was over the death of a half-inch long insectile colleague named Anthony. R.I.P. wherever you are, little guy. And the way we originally met, let's just say how many relationships have you had that began with you breaking into your future partner's dad's basement to steal a piece of secret technology. At least there was one way in which our relationship was typical. We had a little difficult patch and broke up for a while. But even then, the way we got back together was, okay, once again weird. I want to share this story with you because it kind of leads to later events with the Avengers. But one thing I've learned about being in a relationship, sometimes the hard way, is that two different people can experience the same thing together in two entirely different ways. So to make sure I'm getting the story straight, I'm sitting down with Hope to hear and share her take on what happened. It all started right after our Pym Tech heist when I was recruited by some Avengers to go fight some other Avengers. See, it's not just couples who had breakups. Unfortunately, in doing so, I kind of borrowed the Ant-Man suit and took it to Germany without asking permission. Hope has quite a different take on this. As she recounts it, my father and I had just begun to trust you and to think of you as someone who could possibly join the tight-knit circle of what we Pym Van Dynes had devoted our lives to. In my mom's case, what she'd sacrificed so much of her life for, and besides trust, I was starting to develop some non-professional feelings for you too, and then you went and betrayed everything. That perspective explains why Hope and Hank cut off all ties to me for the next 2 years while I was put under house arrest for acting as an unregistered superhero in that intra-Avengers fracas. Still, you know me, I prefer to focus on the positive. Like Hope's in my emotional reunion when she came to spring me from house arrest to help her and Hank. But as before, Hank says she's experienced somewhat different feelings during that reunion. In her words, disgust. Did you spend the entire 2 years in that bathrobe? And also disgust on a deeper level. Seeing you again, remembering you in Dad's suit and what you had done with it, brought up all kinds of complicated feelings I've been trying to put behind me. Fortunately for both of us and eventually the world, Hope doesn't let any feelings get in the way of a mission, especially one involving her mother, Janet Van Dyne, wife of Hank, formerly known as the Wasp, had been trapped in the quantum realm for decades, but she had recently found a way to contact us. And now we were going to try and find her by going back into Hank's quantum tunnel. Except to do that, we needed a key component, and the only way we could get it was from this sleazebag underground tech dealer named Sonny Birch. So we set up a meeting with him to buy it. Only during that meeting, Birch figured out who Hope was and double-crossed her to steal Hank's lab, which had been shrunk down to the size of a suitcase. Hope again remembers this a bit differently. According to her, there was no we. It was me alone at that skeevy hotel bar with Birch and his cronies, and suddenly I was fighting them off alone, and then you showed up too. Then you let that glowing woman named Ghost run off with the lab. I'm not sure this is a completely fair assessment, but I can see why Hope felt that way, because at that point, she was still very untrusting of me. Our first meetup in 2 years, and the first thing I'd do is put her dad's life work in jeopardy for the second time. Scott, glass half full of Pym particles here again. We got the suitcase lab back. However, Hope reminds me, actually before that we got captured by Ghost, who was only going to let us go if we healed her quantum energy problems by killing my mom. Obviously, that was unacceptable, so we managed to escape, got the tunnel working again, and even finally got in direct communication with Janet Van Dyne. What a relief. Again, though, from Hope's point of view, relief wasn't what she was feeling. She reminds me that it wasn't exactly direct communication, as thanks to a bizarre property of the quantum realm, Janet was actually speaking through me. As she puts it, can you imagine anything more disturbing than hearing your long, thought-to-be-dead mother's words coming out of your ex-boyfriend's mouth? Honestly, I can't. And I'd rather really not try. But still, we'd actually found Janet, and now the only challenge was figuring out how we could get into the quantum realm to rescue her. Here, too, Hope remembers a few more complications. There was also the fact your prison buddies had ratted Dad and me out, getting us arrested by the FBI, plus Ghost still had my dad's stolen work. Of course, she's right, and that was really a rough road. I don't mean to downplay it. I think it was just that because Hope and I had survived tougher scrapes, my confidence in us, a confidence that I understand she wasn't quite feeling at that point, was keeping me going. And this is where I'm really glad I asked Hope to join me for this, because what she says next is a bit of a revelation to me. Scott, you don't know what it was like growing up with Hank Pym as a father, seeing how important all this was to him, feeling how he lived and died over every breakthrough and setback, and here we were on the cusp of losing it all. She's right. I really had no clue about how deeply all this cut for her until now. Both Hope and Hank play things so close to the vest sometimes, it's hard to see how hard the disappointments hurt them where it counts. But to get back to the story, I definitely owed Hank Pym a get out of jail free card, so I used some of my old ex-con skills to bust us out of FBI custody. Then we took on Ghost, endured a seemingly endless series of car chases, and battled back and forth for possession of that shrunken lab all the way to the San Francisco Bay. That's where I used the suit to go giant and snatch Hank's lab back once and for all. As I talked about briefly before, using Pym particles to turn gigantic takes a toll. Although I successfully grabbed the then to me minuscule lab, I also lost consciousness and plunged into the bay where the world's greatest superhero rescued me from the from a watery grave. Hope seems okay with this description. The world's greatest superhero. Then after a tiny hair-raising expedition into the quantum realm, Hank managed to get Janet back out. Whew, all's well that ends well, right? At this point, Hope remains silent for a minute, then slowly and carefully she speaks. I spent that day in absolute terror about my mom. She continues. And that was on top of all the tough stuff we'd been through. Someone always going to prison, multiple sociopaths trying to kill us, sometimes at the same time, and then having my mom come back from what we thought was the dead after 3 decades. I know I act like nothing phases me, but it was a lot. She's right. It was. And here's what I'm telling Hope, and what I also want to tell you, and about whatever you're going through on the inside or outside, whether it involves glowing quantum ladies or not, you don't have to deal with this alone. In a strange way, I think that insight might be part of how Hope and I eventually managed to patch things up. I had broken her and her dad's trust massively, but during all this we found a way of connecting again. You see, Hope didn't share a lot of what she was going through at the time. In fact, I'm just finding out about a lot of it right now as I write this. But as the two of us dive back into the fray together, part of me was working twice as hard to show her how dedicated I was to her and her dad and mom to prove how much they meant to me. I'd like to think that just enough of that being there 200% got through to her. And since I don't see Hope shaking her head no, I'll keep going and conclude with one more thought. Being there 200% is something we can all do for each other, no matter what kind of relationship we're in, or what relationship we're trying to mend. I managed to prove to Hope that she wasn't alone because I was there, and not going anywhere. And on this point, Hope says our stories are in perfect alignment. That's a heavy chapter in the end there, when it comes down to it. Heavy chapter. Now it is time for another frequently asked Ant-Man question. Question: aren't you worried that this technology could fall into the wrong hands? Answer: yeah. Something like 95% of the stuff I get wrapped up involves technology falling into the wrong hands. To say nothing of the risks of the technology even in the right hands. Even with less advanced tech, this is always a risk. But what's the alternative? Don't continue innovating? The way my fellow superheroes and I try to address this issue is by keeping a close eye on what we call a change in the battlefield. By that I mean we pay attention to the news and take note when something that's been basically impossible for a human to achieve suddenly happens. Then we know there's been a battlefield change, that some new ability or device has entered the arsenal of Earth dwellers or visitors, and that it's probably not going to be used for good. Let's see how long the next chapter is, or if we just. Okay, yes, we will definitely continue and finish this next chapter and then call it. Chapter 7 Side by Side. Superheroing with your significant other. Okay, so now Hope and I were back together for what seemed like the long haul, which meant we were now facing one of those paradoxes of life. Sometimes you fight the most with the one you love, but what if you're also simultaneously fighting supervillains? Clearly disregarding the time-tested maxim, don't date at work, I've come to appreciate both the perks and pitfalls of this lifestyle. Confusingly, though, those perks and pitfalls often go hand in hand to illustrate what I mean. Imagine working very closely and on a daily basis with the person you're most attracted to in the world. And then during that work, seeing them at their very best, strong, steady, steely, under even the most terrifying conditions. Always cool headed and mission focused. And to top it all off, bringing all those qualities to the service, and usually life saving, of others. Sometimes it takes more than superhero strength to not feel overwhelmed by a gusher of love and admiration. And when you do find yourself with them in a moment of respite, especially if it happens to be in a beautiful location, hey, supervillains like to get outside sometimes too. It can get very confusing. Part of your brain is screaming, remember why you two are here together, while another part is murmuring, hey, couldn't we just steal a moment to enjoy this nice place we ended up together? To say nothing of those situations when you're trapped with them in a very small space and are reminded of just how darn good she always smells. And that's one of the good problems. A larger complication in this perpetually unbalanced work-life balance is what I call fighting other battles. Perhaps this rings true in your relationship as well. You're yelling and screaming at each other over the stupidest thing, and often it's not until later that you realize that all that rage was not even truly about that thing. It was about a completely different, stupid thing that you were annoyed about earlier, but which never got resolved. The dangerous part is when that pent-up, unfought fight spills over into the actual life or death one you're currently engaged in. Oh, so you can aim that reducing disc right at an oncoming military transport vehicle, but you can't toss a t-shirt in the laundry hamper? Oh, so you'll take 3 punches to the head from a mercenary, but you're afraid to try one bite of my world-famous chili dog meatloaf? The good news is there's a quick way out of any of those intertwined battles. It's by reciting a set of words so devastatingly powerful, even Doctor Strange has nothing that competes. Those magical words? You're right. I'm sorry. Another anxiety I've felt in all my relationships, but which takes on a sharper hue on the battlefield, is one I call exposing your true self. And I don't mean that alter ego secret identity game. Let's face it, ever since Tony Stark straight up announced to the world, I am Iron Man, that whole move has lost its subversive cool factor. Nowadays, the only reaction I get from clearing my throat, retracting my helmet, and proclaiming in a deep, rich, dramatic baritone, I am Ant-Man, is noted, and would Ant-Man like curly fries with that? No, what I'm talking about is revealing your worst traits to the last person you'd ever want to think any less of you. For me, that worry comes up around the issue of showing fear around hope, which I know on an intellectual level is just silly. Maybe it's a hero complex. Yes, even actual heroes get them. But for me, at least, it's real and it's a constant struggle. And what's odd is it's not really even my biggest problem. I'm fairly proud of the fact that whether facing down one half of Earth's mightiest heroes or the universe's biggest threat, I don't scare that easily. But Hope doesn't even seem capable of fear. It's like the woman was born without an amygdala. Or maybe she's just trained it out of herself with that same steely drive and determination that first made her a hero and now has made her a business leader. Either way, the upshot is, when I get even just a little bit scared, I get more scared of Hope seeing me scared. If that was confusing to follow, imagine trying to keep a handle on it in the middle of a fight. There's a picture of Hope. Sometimes in the heat of battle, I can't help but stop and think, she likes me. This usually happens right before I get knocked unconscious. That's the caption. Another challenge to my sense of combat time couples in is temper. when all your senses are locked onto defeating your foe. You don't have a lot of mental gas left in the tank to choose your words carefully. So what happens when the two of you have a plan, but it's swiftly going wrong? Or even worse, when the plan is still good, but one of you forgets or screwed up their part, and the bad guy is using that advantage to close in? There was this one time when the two of us were cut off from our resizing controls. A set of mechanical gears were getting ready to chew us up, and Hope felt correctly that we could have escaped the situation more easily had I loaded in the magnetized grappling hook rather than the unmagnetized one. However, Hope chose to express the sentiment in language so colorful, it informed me that she did indeed know a four-letter word besides can't. Now, in even the most benign situations, the tendency in a couple is to lash out because you know the other person can take it. You feel as if we're safe. And you know that expression, watch out, you might say something you regret? In the civilian world, that's of course great advice, along with never go to bed angry. You really do never know with 100% certainty if you might never see a loved one again. But for romantically connected superheroes, there's a very high statistical chance this is the very last thing you ever say to them. Long story short, Hope and I obviously survived that near metal mastication, as did our relationship. It just takes some time getting used to that the idea you have to fight to preserve both at the same time. Another layer to that self-consciousness, which might be unique to me, but I suspect really isn't, is the additional meta fear of letting her dad down. Nowadays, I think I've proven myself to Hank Pym as a proper heir to the Ant-Man suit. But in a funny way, having earned his approval, now I feel even more anxious about losing even a drop of it. Maybe because it was so hard won, or maybe because I'm starting to see him as a model for the kind of hero I want to be. Now, obviously, Hope is in every possible way her own person who makes her own decisions. But somehow, subconsciously, there's still a part of me that feels like I'm living on borrowed time. Like one day I'm going to screw things up too much and Hank is going to swoop in, likely ferried by a river of ants, and say, nope, this phase of the experiment is over. So that, along with the other stuff, translates into a kind of a perfectionism I try to hold myself to all the time, which is completely unrealistic and completely impossible to remove from the ongoing soundtrack of "You Don't Really Deserve This, Scott" that lives in my brain 24/7. Even though I've bounced back countless times, there's still a live, burning piece of me that sees myself as no more than convict slash divorcee slash absentee dad. It takes more mental energy than I'd like to quiet that voice, or at least convince it that others don't see me that way. And when things sometimes go south with Hope, as they do in all relationships, I can hear it shouting, you see? She knows you're still no good at the core. It also doesn't help when I remember how happy my ex Maggie is with her new guy. That accusatory brain voice now switches over and starts asking, are you just standing in the way of Hope being much happier with another guy? Now, the good news is, having lived and loved through this rocky terrain, I've found some bright spots as well. One is that Hope and I, like most couples who've been together for a while, have a secret language. Shorthand absurd nicknames, shared references, and inside jokes that can be as helpful in situations with no time to spare as it is annoying when we play charades with friends. Cracking these jokes can also be critical to boosting each other's morales in moments when all seems lost. On the other hand, an inopportune but uncontrollable snicker can also be the thing that fatally gives away your position. Along these lines, we've also developed a pretty keen talent for anticipating the other's moves. No, not the way you're undoubtedly thinking on the dance floor. There's no hope for me there. But when we're locked in combat, even a telepath couldn't keep up with the speed of our nonverbal communications. And as unbelievable as it sounds, taking on evil can be a really helpful form of relationship building. Love experts say that for a couple to stand the test of time, they have to have an indoor hobby and an outdoor hobby. Fortunately, when you're going on high-stakes missions, you often get both of those things in one afternoon. Hearing it up together also helps with your sense of relationship chill. Put simply, after a long day or week or quantum half-decade of battling baddies, the two of us just come home and collapse on the sofa, which is heaven. We get to do normal couple things like disagree over who's killing the plants faster. Hope gets to let her guard down and get extremely almost frighteningly passionate over who needs to go home from Dating Show Island. I get to see her actually atypically be bad at something. For example, when we play a video game together, Well, let's just say that Hope would probably be better mowing down zombies in real life. Not like that would ever happen. But the main saving grace is we're just too exhausted to argue about anything, which I admit doesn't help with the unresolved issues point I made above. But it's a nice feeling to come home and settle into. It makes our humble, slightly stained sofa feel more secure than even the raft prison. And that feeling is just one example of how Hope and I do together helps us appreciate couplehood. There are so many troubled loners in our profession on both the good and evil side. It almost seems like a job requirement. By contrast, Hope and I balance each other. She's calm and I'm alert. She's sky, I'm earth. She commands, I'm obey. She commands, I obey. But all these perks of being heroes with benefits pale next to the biggest one of all. The greatest advantage of being lovers and fighters is that it gives you a true sense of life's priorities. A lot of time, we superheroes don't exactly see the people we're saving. We have to just hold the idea in our heads, abstractly. In our case, we see what's at stake every moment, and then Hope races me into the house. Wins, of course, flashes me that incredibly hard one-half smile, and a light in my heart comes on and recharges all my batteries at once. Put simply, every day the two of us come back home together in one piece is a miracle, a precious gift. The most precious gift to which no superpower granted by serum or gamma ray or technology could compare. And when you've got that, you are the most literal definition of invincible. We'll go ahead and read this frequently asked Ant-Man question, and then we will say goodnight. Question: what's your favorite thing to grow or shrink for fun? Answer: let me be clear up front. Pim particles are not to be used for fun. They are serious business. But hypothetically, I imagine it'd be pretty fun and only a little sticky to have your kid walk downstairs on a Saturday morning and find a giant jelly donut waiting for them. Especially if you were, say, hypothetically trapped in your house for 2 years and racking your brain for new things to keep that hypothetical kid happy. Man, I miss those hypothetical days. And that is all we are going to cover tonight in Look Out for the Little Guy, written by Scott Lang, aka Ant-Man, aka ghost written by, what's the guy's name again? Rob Kuttner. This is a very deep book, a lot different than I expected, but I'm deeply enjoying it. And good night, everyone. Get tucked in, have your warm drink, tell your loved ones that you love them, and we shall see you tomorrow for the main course. Good night.